Doesn't Lane look so pretty?
Oh,
You do. You look really beautiful.
thank you so much. I put eyeliner on today, which I almost
so
never
did
ever
I.
do. Yeah.
Yeah, yours looks good.
Your eyes look
I
so
noticed
big
yours
and green.
Green.
Uh-huh.
They sometimes change.
They're drawing some grain from the sweater today. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
You
That's
should,
so nice.
watch this video, you guys.
Let's watch.
Wherever you're listening.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
can
won't
watch.
know what happened if you don't look
on
at the
Spotify,
video.
they can watch. And on YouTube. The Apple Music, I don't know how that works.
I don't think there's video on Apple.
Okay. Cool. I'd love to know how you guys listen to this. Yeah. Anyway, today's episode, you just said something before. Well, hi guys, I'm Jessica Hover. My friends call me Jess, and this is...
I'm Lane Dealing-Sherland, and this is Very Good Enough, a podcast from Very Good Mothers Club.
Yep. Okay, hold on, because
Yes.
this is coming out really soon.
Yeah.
So I can say something.
You can say anything you want. It's coming out on Tuesday.
You know Lane, and she's like a genie when it comes to understanding toddlers and guiding us through really hard things. And I'm saying this not as her co-host, but as a parent of toddlers who comes to her for wisdom and then immediately starts applying it and telling Sean. The other day, after our call with the moms, I got off and went to him and was like, we've been doing something wrong with these kids in like the best way. And he was so relieved. He was like, oh, that makes so much sense. Thank you so much. It was how we were disciplining. It had to do with the biting topic and what you said. Anyway, really helpful. Okay, my point in bringing this up is Lane agreed to do 2 classes for us. One is going to be in person in our shop in Los Angeles. So if you're a local mom, come on Thursday, December 7th at 10:30 in the morning, and you can do a class with us. It's for baby mamas, for parents in general. You could have a baby, you could have a toddler, you could be a caregiver. It is all about toddler tantrums. And then she's going to do an online version of this class on December 14th.
Yes.
Also a Thursday. That one is at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And these are classes that you pay a little extra. If you're a member, it's cheaper. Worth it, like to the maximum. I'm saying this as someone who is benefiting so much from the things she's teaching. So if you are ever wondering how are you supposed to handle these tantrums that are happening, if you're feeling anxious about them, if you're feeling, sometimes Sean and I will wake up and be like carrying this sort of dread of like, another day of a lot of screaming, a lot of yelling, like, how do we do this? This class is going to help so much. So join it. This is a very shameless plug. Join these classes. It'll help around the holidays. You're going into a time where probably we're not going to have as much childcare, or we're going to have a lot more sugar, or we're going to have a lot more family members, opportunity for stimulation and hyperactive children. You're going to want the tools to succeed. So join us.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're also going to talk about like prevention. Like how do we... I know they seem crazy. It seems like these random explosions that just happen like, oh no, I stepped on a landmine and who could ever have known that that was there? And they're actually just kind of not. So over like hundreds of toddlers in my life, I've been like, I see what you guys are doing. These things happen at these times for kind of these reasons. And I mean, the best way to deal with tantrums is to stay out of these power struggle situations.
Sure.
So I'm going to really, really put some emphasis on that. So if you're feeling them a lot of times in your day and your life, our goal is to actually also like decrease the number. There's going to be a lot of like, this is how we handle them. These are the different kinds, but then also like, how do we make it so that you're removing these from your life rather than just coming crashing into them over and over and over again. It's going to be really good. I can't believe that in a year and a half, we haven't done like a deep dive specifically into tantrums. Like we've touched on it so gently, but like I'm really excited to get to be like anatomy of a tantrum. Imagine me being like in an 80s classroom, like pulling down one of those projectors, like and getting out my little pointer stick. This is what's happening.
And the fact that you're catching it now at this stage of Lane's career, my people, it's going to be so personalized. In a year or two, it may not be like this, but right now at the stage we're in this little business of love, you can bring your very real questions and get them answered. So if you're going through something very specific and you have no idea how to solve it and Google is making you confused, come and let's talk about it and process it. So
and
join
if you come
these
to the
classes.
shop, we can also snuggle.
I know, snuggle. Yeah, come to the shop. It's so cute. You should come.
So cute.
Anyway, okay, so that's that.
Yes. So now we are bringing to you something we've been sitting on for a little while, this like little piece of treasure. This is a conversation we had a bit ago with this very special lady, like really special than it's more of a like story than than like a conversation with like, we brought this topic to this expert and we're like, help us. This one's a lot more like personal and open-hearted and just like sharing about life, because sometimes we sort of pluck these topics out of life and then let's like talk about this one compartmentalized piece, but really all of the things that we talk about are happening inside of these like rich, textured, complex, tragic and powerful and amazing and sad and like all of that sort of like tapestry of our life.
Yeah.
And so this is one of those where it's more tapestry than it is topic. And it's very precious.
It's precious. And it's one that, so I've known this woman for many years. She's going to be sharing a story about loss and grief and tragedy, which Lane and I were recently like, do we share this around the holidays? But then the more we talked about it and the more we're talking to you, the holidays have this weird way of intensifying really sad feelings while we're experiencing really happy things.
Yeah.
And so this episode is going to talk about deep, heavy things, but it's going to feel light, hopeful, and like entertaining, right?
Part of it is her presentation. She's quite a storyteller.
Yeah.
It's like very funny. We laughed a lot of times in a story that was deeply, deeply sad. But without her like pulling out any of the tragedy, you know, she was not like decreasing any of the pain.
It wasn't like sugar coated.
No, but she's so buoyant, and her story is long because life is long.
Yeah.
And so the unfolding of this story is actually like quite joyful and beautiful and like satisfying to the soul. It's very deep. But though the topic is weighty.
We're like prefacing this because we don't want you to leave being like, oh no, a heavy topic. Right. Life is already too heavy.
Yeah. Or skip it because you're like, I don't want to be sad.
Yeah, you won't. You will be entertained. You will be encouraged. It will fill you. Sean and I met Vee King-Cunningham back when Jeremy was alive. So Jeremy is her husband. She'll tell the story.
Yeah.
It's an amazing story. But so we've met her pre-tragedy. I like followed along with her story while a bunch of things were unfolding. She's now living this really rich, beautiful life with a ginormous family and a lot of love. And she's just gone through a lot, and her way of being vulnerable and open over the course of these years now, it's been like, when did I first find her? Over, I don't know, like 13 years ago. I was using her blog as like a resource, and she's very encouraging, very hopeful, but also honest. And so it's not the fluffy kind where you just are like getting cotton candy from trees. It's, I don't know. It feels like meaty and rich and like it's going to do something good in you. Okay, well, what if we start with kind of an intro of who you are and what your life looks like right now? And then we're going to rewind backwards to when I first met you.
Okay, yes. Okay, so hi, I'm Vee. My first name is Veronica. I've been Vee since college. And right now I live in Greenbrier, Tennessee, which is not too far from Nashville. I am married to a pastor in Tennessee, and we have 6 kids, all who live with us in Tennessee, well, ish. And then a soon-to-be son-in-law in the area. We do full-time ministry, but I also do my own thing. I run a business called The Letter V. Cheeky, I know. And I do a lot of hand lettering and printables and just fun things to make life easier for mamas, to make little moments that are really special or magical, or, I just like to, sprinkle glitter everywhere. So that's what I do.
That's so fun. And so you have 6 children. How old are the kids now?
So right now, my oldest, our 3 oldest are girls and our 3 youngest are boys. So our oldest are 21, 19, 17, and my boys are 16, 12, and 9.
Whoa, you have a lot going on. Quite a spread.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Usually I can spit that out really quickly, and that took me a minute. I had to really
There's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we rewind backwards, the way that I was going to say the way that I know you is through your blog. I feel like the blog was like the intimate picture into what your life looked like. I met you in real life. I met you actually at a church that my husband had gone to, and we were living in LA, but he's from Michigan. Are you from Michigan? Is that the connection? He was in Rochester. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And your husband was a worship leader there, I think, when I was there as like a guest. And so I met you there. And then somewhere around that time, I started reading your blog, and that's where you were telling your story. And I was hooked, very hooked. I mean, I still talk about you. But so I'm wondering, if you don't mind, if you would take us backwards. And what I've kind of prepared people for in this episode is that we're going to talk through grief, and we're going to talk through hope and how those kind of coexist. And I've learned a lot about this from you and what you've chosen to put out of yourself on the internet, which the blog still is out there. I went and looked it up recently. Yeah. So people can read
I
it.
looked it up recently too. It's been a minute, and I'm like, whoa, it's
yeah.
But I leave it up there because it is still a resource for a lot of people. And so it still is. Every once in a while, I'll still get some sweet things through there. So
yeah, it's the honesty and vulnerability of it that I really appreciate. I was telling Lane this morning, there's like one piece, I haven't read it in, I mean, it was probably a decade, but it was talking about like you going to a nail salon and overhearing people's kind of complaints and the way it felt with everything you were processing. So now I'm giving away too many spoilers. I'll let you rewind us. And then if we can just go there, that would be really
yes.
beautiful.
Okay. So we're going to rewind to 2010. I was 28 years old. I was 6 months pregnant with my third child, and we had two little people, 4 and 3 years old. I was working multiple jobs. I was working at a childcare. I was doing, I was teaching preschool, and my husband was a worship leader. He was working grounds for a college next door. So we were kind of like in the throes of early raising family, poor as can be, just, working through the days. And I'll fast forward to the day before my husband died. We had a full day, 14, 16 hours with my kids. I was blessed enough to have a job where my kids came with me. So they came to preschool with me. I got to be their first preschool teacher. And then I worked at Lifetime Fitness in the childcare. So they got to come with me there and play there while I worked, which was a great setup. But we had I worked both jobs all day. My kids were with me all day. My husband worked both jobs all day. And we came together in the evening to rehearse for a worship night, a worship evening that we were going to have at church. And that day, the day in and of itself is pretty solidified in my mind. But that day before, I remember just being like completely in the throes of normalcy, like completely overwhelmed by 2 kids. My transition from 1 to 2 kids was by far my hardest transition, and I have 6. So that was really overwhelming for me. I remember being just completely afraid and doing all the things and juggling all the things and not having money to do all the things. And so, we're talking like post 2008, where there was just huge crash, and, it was an interesting time. So this long day that has etched in my mind of just normalcy, busy, that quintessential, like we've got too much going on, too many things involved in too many things. But it was a really sweet day when I look back at it, because it was so normal and it was so not out of the ordinary. And I remember coming home late. I mean, we were probably coming home about 10 p.m. from our rehearsal, driving home, holding hands and just like downloading from our day. And our kids are falling asleep in the back. I laid them out on a church pew to go to bed, and we took them home and got ready the next day and did it all again. And so that sweet ride home and that just normalcy, that is something that is cherished forever, because the next day, again, day as normal, took the kiddos to school. We happened to have this little break for a lunch. And so since my husband Jeremy worked right next door, I was like, hey, you want to go grab lunch really quick before I start my second job? And he was like, yeah, that'd be awesome. And so here we are. We take the kids to, it was like an A&W KFC situation that was right by where I picked my son up. So we had lunch there. I remember it just being, again, very like movie-esque. We had a server who came and stopped us and was like, your family's just so sweet. Your kiddos are being so well behaved. She gave them like a free pie because we were sitting there. And now, mind you, my kids are not always well behaved, but I just remember that moment being very sweet and very special. And you know, I'm 6 months pregnant, so we took all these pictures, and I took pictures with the kiddos. Jeremy took his very last picture sitting in the booth at a KFC with his son. And so I dropped him off back at work, and I was sitting in the car with him, and he didn't do this often, but he kind of touched my belly, gave me a kiss, usually our nighttime routine, right? And he said, you know, I think I'm going to get off work early today and go to my hunting spot. Because it was a great day to go hunting, and he had a few hours he could take off, and we had some friends that had some property. It was about 20 minutes from our house. And so he was going to do that. And, I remember giving him like a silly pouty face and was like, all right, well, I'll do bedtime with the kiddos and we'll be ready for you when you get back and whatever. So, that was the last time I saw him. And I went to my second job. I remember texting him I texted him at 4:34 p.m. And that number has since come back to me very regularly. But at 4:34, I texted him, I love you. And right before that, I was walking out of work. So I was like, hey, I'm off work. I love you. And that same minute right before, he had texted his coworker and boss that he had gotten to the hunting spot. And neither one of us heard anything from then on out.
Okay.
So yeah, it, fast forward that evening, you know, I got the kiddos ready for bed. We're ready to go. I actually had some friends that came over. You know, the stars kind of aligned there, and I just happened to have people in my home. That was not a normal thing. But about, I don't know, maybe 9 o'clock, I texted a friend and I was like, hey, have you heard from Jeremy? I haven't heard from him. I know sometimes when he goes hunting, you just don't know, like he could be out in the bush and not be able to access his phone. That happens. And he said, yeah, it's kind of been a while though. So maybe I'll go check on him. And so he and the coworker that my husband texted went out to go check on him, and called me at 10:48 to tell me that he was gone. And so, of course, we didn't know what happened until autopsy came, but he had a massive heart attack at the bottom of his tree stand. And, I mean, doing what he loved. But, yeah, it was definitely a shock to my system. And so my best friend, who happened to be there, her sister came along, one and only time she ever did. So she stayed with my kids while we drove 20 minutes to the spot where my husband was. And from there on out, it's a complete blur. But that was my life in 2010. And of course it was just, I mean, you can read about it in my blog. That's one of the things that happened, is that I was so out of it and needed such a space to spew that became, that became what happened.
Yeah. And privately, like grief is, I mean, obviously you have a lot more to say about grief than I do, but like the thing of it being observed and of other people being around and you needing to have that be a social interaction is so intense sometimes. And there's this odd thing about taking care of the other person who's supposed to take care of you. So it makes sense that to have a blog space where you just it gets to be just output and there's kind of no loop back. That makes a lot of sense as a coping mechanism.
Yes. And ironically, I mean, I did have a blog, but y'all, it was like the saddest it was just my family, you know, it was like, I didn't want to forget my pictures or what I did that day or what we dressed up for Halloween. It didn't have a following, really. I mean, very little. And, you know, it was just something I dabbled in. And so for me, it wasn't really a social space. It was just like, I got to let this out. I am so lost. I have all these feelings. And I've kind of always been a person who needed to write things out for it to make sense. You know, sometimes I don't know how I feel until I put it on paper. And so sometimes I'll write stuff out and then I'm like, whoa, you know? And so it just kind of became wasn't necessarily for anyone. It just, I felt lost and I didn't know where to go. And I've always said grief is a very selfish process. It's a very selfish experience. And it's really hard to see outside of yourself when you're in the thick of it. And it's not good, bad, or otherwise. It just is. And it's trying to claw your way out of that. And to me, that had been my sign of the light that I started to see post grief or mid grief or as I've grown, is that once you can start looking outside of yourself to see others, that's when that shifts. And so that selfish process that I didn't care who heard it. I didn't care what people thought about it. I was just like, blah, 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 blah. This is how I feel. And so, of course, the way things work in life sometimes is that people found it. And then people were like, oh my goodness, I feel this way too. And no one's ever said this out loud, or this is really crappy. And a whole community arose from that.
Yeah. Amazing. And am I right in remembering that the pregnancy that you were now having to walk through without Jeremy, you weren't even sure you wanted to have another baby?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So, yes, I did not want a third child. I wanted 2 kids, y'all. I wanted 2. So
6 kids later.
Whoa. and
my 2.5 infants, that's all I needed, but it was another one of those, that's a complete divine intervention. Another story for another podcast, but we did have a conversation on the way home one day, and I was like, I'm being selfish. I don't want any more kids because that's more work for me. And I gave God a window of one day and ended up pregnant.
One day.
Yes. I woke up the next morning. I was like, never mind, Lord. I changed my mind. I don't want to do that. And so, I remember just feeling like, of course I was thrilled. I mean, there's no doubt about that, but it just was funny how those circumstances ended up. And so I dealt with a lot of anger for that because once I lost my husband, I was like, here I am stuck in this situation that I probably wouldn't have got myself into by myself. And so here I am now having to do this alone and scared and angry. And that was not my favorite way to do that.
No. And when it came to delivering the baby, who was with you? Because you had to do that now alone.
Yes. So my best friend actually moved in with me shortly after Jeremy died. She lived with me for about 6 months and helped me. She just stepped right in. And so Sarah came in with me, but then Jeremy's mom actually came in. So Jeremy was Canadian, so all his family is in Canada, and his mama came in from Canada to be there. She cut the cord. And so she got to be a part of that. But when I got up that morning, I remember going in for a C-section, asking the doctor if they could just put me out for the experience. I was like, I don't really want to be, I was so nervous about it. And she was like, no, honey, we can't do that. I was like, are you sure? Because I feel like trauma people can do this, and not remember. I feel like you could if you really wanted to. She said no. And so I remember because I was wearing Jeremy's wedding ring around my neck and she wanted me to take it off. And I said, I'm not going to. She said, well, just know the risks are, you could burn into your skin or whatever. I was like, I don't care. It's not going. It stays with me. So it stayed with me. I have a teddy bear that Jeremy gave me when we first started dating. That came to delivery with me. It's just all those security blankets because I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it by myself. Of course, I didn't do it by myself.
Yeah, and then the baby looks like him. I mean,
he really
the hair.
He's got his dad's hair. He looks like me and Jeremy's head, Yes. And he is the boy that saved my life. He really is. I mean, when you go through such a traumatic event like that and you're, you lose a spouse, a child, anything where you're like having to just put one foot in front of the other, those kids are what you get up for. I wasn't doing it for me anymore. I was doing it for them. But that little boy, that baby who couldn't, keep himself busy, who couldn't, sit down and watch a show while I was not able to function. He couldn't do that. And so it required all of me. And of course, I did not do that by myself. 100%. I had an incredible community around me that I would not have gotten through without. But, they just force you to move forward even when you don't necessarily want to. And so, he really is. He's the boy that saved me. And he is my most inquisitive child. He loves to talk about his daddy, even though he's never met him. He loves to ask questions. He sleeps with Jeremy's quilt every night that has all of his t-shirts on it. That's his. And so it's very sweet because I feel like he's very connected to his dad, even though they've never met.
Yeah. Yeah. Which then leads us into, you are married with many children. So how? Where's the process? And I actually already know the answer. I read the book.
But I am riveted. I cannot wait to find out what happens.
Please read the book.
For a while we did, we actually got blog posts together, different things, because we were going to write a book. And sometimes I feel like maybe I should. There's just so many details there. It's hard to get out in one sitting. But
I have to tell you, I remember very distinctly this one post that your husband wrote kind of in defense of you that Sean and I read aloud together and were talking to his family about, because it was beautiful and such a good picture of the protection that you deserved. Obviously, okay, you tell the story, but people were
you
so
probably
weird.
remember it better than I do. There's so many
I'll
pockets
speak up
of
then. Yes,
and that's why I'm glad I wrote things down. There's so many pockets of my past that, that time period, that probably year after Jeremy died, is very muddy to me. And my timeline is not right. And there's a lot of things I remember and don't remember. And so I am thankful to be able to go back to it, because I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that happened.
Yeah.
But so my husband, Steve, is actually an acquaintance I met through my late husband, Jeremy. And so they kind of knew each other in the church circle when Jeremy was leading worship at youth rallies and different things. And Steve was a youth minister at the time. And so they had crossed paths a couple times, and then we ended up with mutual friends. And so I moved my best friends down to Indiana, where my current husband was living. And that's where I met him. And actually, this is just a fun little story. So the day that we moved our best friends to Indiana, they got the job at Steve's church. I was pregnant with Carter, brand new pregnant. Nobody knew. Jeremy and I hadn't told anybody. And when Jeremy and I went to go help them move, we had dinner with Steve and our friends, and we were sitting around the dinner table, and he just happened to be the rando stranger who found out that I was pregnant with Carter, because we were sharing that with friends. I hadn't even told my parents. Isn't that crazy? It just kind of spewed out. And so I have this vision of looking at the table, seeing the one time I remember seeing Jeremy and Steve right next to each other talking about this boy that they would both end up fathering. It's wild.
That's wild.
Oh my gosh. That makes the hair stand up.
Yeah, that's
Isn't
it is like a movie.
Yeah. So
how special.
Yes.
And Steve has since he's been here for every one of Carter's birthdays. Carter has always had his dad, and that's really sweet. So Steve and I met there. And then after Jeremy died, I made a lot of trips back to Indiana to be around my people. And, I wasn't working, and there were times where I needed to leave. And so we spent a lot of weekends in Indiana and just being around friends and playing games. And he had 2 daughters who we used to joke looked like my daughters. I actually have a picture of them the first few weeks we met, and it's a picture of them side by side. And I was like, Instagram caption, sisters from another mister. If that's not weird, I don't know what is.
No,
but
I remember this. It's so funny. I remember this because I couldn't tell which ones were yours. I was getting so confused.
That's crazy.
How funny.
So here they are now, sisters in real life. And it's been a crazy journey. So, I kind of knew of him in passing. I actually was secondhand watched him go through a divorce, and kind of how he dealt with that as a man, as a minister, as a father, was so impressive to me. And that was actually one of the first times in my grief journey, about maybe 8 or 9 months after Jeremy died, I remember, now keep in mind, my brother actually died as well in that year span, about 8 months after Jeremy died. My brother died of an overdose. And so I was just like swimming in muck and really mad at everything. But I remember when that process happened, I heard about it from a friend, and we had prayed for their family, and we prayed for this situation. And it was the first time I remember feeling like my heart hurt more for somebody else, because here were these girls who didn't have a mom figure in their life, and had never, had a bath from their mom, had never been read a book to from their mom. And I remember thinking, like, I hate what's happening to me. I hate what I'm going through, but my kids will always know how much their dad loved them. And they'll never doubt that they had a dad who was present and participated in their life. And so, God put that prayer on my heart because I got to be the mom to do that for those girls. And and so there's just a lot of pieces that have come beautifully together. It has not been without a lot of bumps and bruises and roller coaster rides, and it's been hard, and it's been painful, and it's been aggravating, but it's been so beautiful. And I love getting to share it because it reminds me to go back, like, wow, I cannot believe, it's just so good to remember and see when you're stuck in a bad place. Like, I'm just as guilty as anyone of taking for granted what I have. And I promised myself I would never do that. But here I am 12 years later, and I'm like, I'm annoyed because my kids didn't pick up their room, or I'm mad at my husband and I don't want to talk to him today. And then I'm like, oh, no, it's so much bigger than that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the way of being a person, right? Is you have these days that are so like, you're so aware of how important everyone is and important everything is, and you don't want to take them for granted. But then to live life is to feel all of these other frustrating things and be annoyed by things that aren't really annoying in the grand scheme of things. Yeah, it's to be a person.
It's kind of our superpower and our like lethal flaw.
I know.
Is like how quickly we adjust, or even how like efficient our brains are at being like, I'm just going to pay attention to what's right in front of me.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. Wait, I want to know though, when you like knew that you liked Steve, like when did that turn for you guys?
And talk about the proposal, because the proposal was really good.
It's the best. It is the best.
And how did you know? How did you know he could handle this? Because this is a big deal. Not handle you, but like this story.
Yes.
How did you feel? Yeah. How did you know he
could
do it?
Okay. So here's another one of those little puzzle pieces that came together so beautifully. So at the time, Steve was doing grief counseling. Of all the things. I didn't know that. Sure. That's just what he was kind of doing in his job. He's working hospice and doing bereavement counseling in a hospital. But he was also volunteering as a camp director for a camp called Camp Hope. And he actually reached out to me about Faith being old enough to go to Camp Hope. She was 5. And I remember thinking, like, I'm not letting my 5-year-old go to camp like my baby. She's never even been away from home. Like, I can't leave her overnight. Well, of course, my friends were right down the road. So I made a trip to Indiana. I signed her up to go to camp. And I stayed right in town because I just couldn't handle it, at 5 years old. And I was a mess, y'all, a mess. And I remember dropping her off, and I just happened to fill out all the paperwork for camp and leave it at home in Michigan. Thought I had turned it in. I didn't.
Very relatable.
So when I got there, he was like, oh, yeah. He just, because he knew who I was, he was like, oh, yeah, but I didn't get any of your information. I was like, what? And so just crying, like, I'm leaving my baby, and now you don't even know my phone number, and you don't know how to get in touch with me. And what if she has bad dreams? And, I was just a mess. And so, he was so sweet because he was like, it's going to be fine. Don't even worry about it. I have your number. I know Chris and Vicky are right. I'm like, I'm staying in town. I can be here, whatever you need. He sent Chris and Vicky, my friends who were living in town, pictures all weekend long to relieve my stress, to let me know that she was doing fine. Wow. Sent her pictures of doing art. And, he was like, just let mom know that she is okay. And I remember telling them, like, I love this man. Please tell him to you, And so So, just there was little pieces of that kind of helped me see the character of Steve. And, but that wasn't just really not on my radar. Honestly, none of that was on my radar. I really had no interest in getting involved in another relationship. I was like, I'm here to raise my babies, do what I need to do. But we had mutual friends who thought, hey, you guys should really chat more. And don't you think this would be nice? And I remember him calling me up on the phone, basically to tell me that all our friends were talking, that we should talk. And both of us kind of being like, yeah, no, we're not, like, nah, we're going through too much. We, recently divorced, recently lost a spouse. And 4 hours later, he was like, this is really nice to have someone to talk to. Can I call you tomorrow? So that began a very lengthy phone relationship from Indiana to Michigan, where we talked on the phone night after night for weeks. And, it wasn't just a dating thing, although that happened very quickly. It was also just such a healing thing, I think, for both of us, because we were both going through our own stuff. But there's just a different level playing field when you're dating and you already have homes and careers and children. It just looks very, very different. And so we were like, this is not messing around. Like, I don't need to just talk to you unless you're my counselor. But like, this isn't going where I need you to leave. And so it happened really quickly. And it was really, I felt like God gave me a lot of confirmation in that process of just getting to know Steve and what he was going through and how he handled all of that. And, we were both like, when we got to that point, 5 kids, oh my goodness, are we going to be able to handle this? Like, what is this going to look like? And it just, all the pieces came together. And so we started talking. Our first date was New Year's Eve of 2011. So about 14 months after Jeremy passed away. We were engaged in March and married in May. Wow. So it was a very quick, but again, we were in different states. We had families, we had homes. We're like, if this is this, then we got to wrap it up. So engagement story. My sweet husband did not live close to me at the time. And so for him to pull that off required a lot of work on his part. And it really was a sweet, sweet story. I did write about it in my blog. So if you happen to want to look it up, you can. Perfect. It's very sweet. Probably the sweetest proposal I've ever known of. And I get to be the lucky recipient of it. So amazing. He was, he had orchestrated a day where he knew I would get ready for the day. Y'all, when you're in grief, that's not a necessity, and even 5 years out of grief, there are some days where that's just not going to happen. Right. And so, but he also knows me and knows that I would be mortified if I got engaged and didn't have makeup on, didn't have my hair done, or did not have my yoga pants on. And so he had some friends come over and they were going to take me shopping for the day. And my best friend who lived with me at the time, she had since moved out, but she was a photographer. And she was doing a photo shoot, quote unquote, at a park. And her car broke down at the park. So she needed me to come get her, which really was a plausible story, I thought. So, so once I get there, she comes out, gives me a big hug. She hands me a rose and a letter. And I was like, what in the world? And this letter she read to me as we walked through the park. And it was really just a letter of, our relationship and our friendship, how much it meant to her, and just how proud she was of how far we'd come together. And she walked me to point after point after point of people in my path who had been a part of my story and had been a part of Steve's story and had been a part of my healing story. Friends from church, friends who, held me while I cried in bed, and my parents were there, and his parents were there. Jeremy's parents were there from Canada. And so I think I walked like a mile and a half or something. I don't know. We disagree on how long it was. But
Sure.
Needless to say, I walked and cried and walked. Yeah. And by the end of it, I had a whole bouquet of roses and a whole pile of letters of things, because he was like, I knew you wouldn't remember this. So we wrote it down so you could go back to it. And he was at the end of it. And so it was a very, very special, symbolic journey of getting from where I was to getting to him. And so, of course, he proposed to me. And what's crazy is it was a March day in Michigan, which is historically very cold. It was 82 degrees. So everybody was dying and melting. And we're all in our sweaters and coats. And it was, one of those days. But we came back to the house later that afternoon and read through all the letters and just cried. His girls were actually at school, and so they could not participate, but they both wrote me their own letters, handwrote me letters. And it was just
so
really just a beautiful story.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. How amazing. And then as you have, now you've been married a long time, but in those early years, I'm sure that had to be like complex emotions for you, and like the missing the past while living in the moment, and probably sometimes even feeling disappointed by the moment, because that's what it is to be human. Yeah. Like, how did you find ways to cope with the grief, the joy, you even grew your family beyond the 5. Yes. I would love to hear some of that. They're 6. Yeah. I would love to hear some of
extra
that.
Person.
Yes. Again, not my idea. All the children. But goodness, what would I do without them,
Yeah. Wait, I have a logistical question about that.
Yes,
Well, I have 2 logistical questions. Great. One, I'm from California, and we notoriously don't know where things are in the Midwest, and I'm super sorry about it.
Yes, ma'am.
But what is the distance that we're talking about here from
Michigan to Indiana?
From Michigan to Indiana, it was probably about 4.5 hours.
Okay.
Driving. So not undoable, within a day's trip. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right. And then how old are his girls in comparison to yours?
So when the girls came into my life, they were 7 and 9, and my daughter was 5. So they're each 2 years apart. Yeah. And so they've been in my life. They're now 21 and 19. So they've been in my life for a long time. Yeah. That's crazy.
Do they call you mom?
Yeah, they always have.
Oh,
yeah, from day one.
Amazing.
Yeah, sweet. And one of them is getting married. This is where
one of them is getting married to one of my best friend's sons. It's just,
that's
really
so
cool.
Cute.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's the cutest. Okay. It really is. Yeah.
I was going to ask the question about Indiana too.
Yes. Yeah, that was a good question. Yeah, it was within a day's drive, but long enough. Yeah.
Far.
So remind me what the question was again.
So it's an amazing story. You get married, but then I'm imagining you're still grieving. You're going to grow your family. You're probably experiencing highs and lows all at the same time, moving. Like how did you cope? What did that feel like? Just anything you remember about that time.
Yeah. So, it's funny because I remember pieces of it, and there are pieces that I don't, but Steve remembers it differently too. And so that's kind of the funny thing about grief, is it kind of shapes the way you see things. I will say there were some days I did that really well, and some days I did it really poorly. And I will say that I've been very blessed to be loved by a man who could walk me through that roller coaster, because he really did. He gets all the credit for that. One of the stories we share often is when we took a 9-day honeymoon to Jamaica. And at the time, our kids were very young. Carter was just barely a year old. And I struggle with that as a mom, because they were little. They grow a lot in a week. I was like, I'm not even going to recognize my own kids. And that was hard in and of itself. But, you're honeymooning as a parent too. That's weird. But there was a night where it all just kind of came crashing down in my heart, where I was like, I was so excited to be Mrs. Cunningham and marry Steve and be his wife, that it didn't really occur to me that meant I couldn't no longer be Jeremy's wife. I wasn't going to be Mrs. King anymore. And I don't know what set that off, but I just remember just crumbling, and him just holding me and rocking me crying with me. And I remember feeling so guilty about that because I was like, this poor man, he's here, here to love me and start this journey with me. And here I am crying about that. And it was no loss of love by any means. It was really just a realization that things were shifting. And so one of the things that goes on in grief is you don't just grieve one time, you grieve every time something new comes up that you don't get to experience with that person. I still have grief to go. I still have children who are going to get married and Jeremy's kids who are going to graduate and all those pieces of life that he's never going to get to be a part of. It's those things that you have to grieve all over again. And so, his oldest daughter is about to graduate early in December. And, my heart already feels that. I feel the weight of that and the meaning of that and how bittersweet that is, And so I can't say that I did that well. I just know that I did it out loud. And there was there was some formula about that, whether it's my personality and I kind of am like, bleh, put it all on the table, whether it was just a healing process of people being like, I see you. And because I see your story, this is how I feel. And this is where I am at. And you're not alone. I feel like the community that was surrounding me, just put me in a spot to be able to do that without too much damage, Definitely there was counseling involved. Definitely there was, a lot of prayer, a lot of hard work, a lot of going back and trying again. This didn't work, so we're going to try something different. And just being willing to be messy. And honestly, as I fast forward 12 years, that's kind of I feel like that's Steve and I's story. Like we come to the table messy and we've lived through enough mess that we're okay with it. And I wasn't okay with that when I was young. When I was in my 20s, I didn't want to be a mess. And I wanted to feel like I had it all together, but life didn't let me do that. And so I had to embrace it. And because of the forced embrace of I'm a mess, so much freedom came from that. Of course, with a lot of fighting, but just kicking and screaming about life, a lot of, just all of it. And so getting to the point where Steve and I, even in ministry, we started new ministry in Tennessee about 2 years ago. And we were like, we thought we were done with ministry. And it's a calling. It's a calling on my husband's heart. If you know him and you get to know his story, that's just who he is. And so, getting pulled back into that, we were like, this is our story. We're a mess. We've been through so much stuff and you are going to take it or leave it because this is just real life. I don't know what else to do with it. I tried to sweep it all under the rug, but it didn't even fit under there. So that's just how it goes.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And then when it came to like that moment of crying on your honeymoon and the two name thing, even going from one to the other, ultimately you decided to keep both names. Is that right?
I did. Yeah. So my last name, actually my full name, I always apologize for people when they have to write my full name, filling out paperwork. It doesn't even fit anywhere. So it is hyphenated. So my name is Veronica King-Cunningham. So much fun for everyone. Wow. But really it's a nod to my love and my past, which Steve is a secure enough a man to know that does not deflect my love for him at all in any way, shape, or form. And I love that about him. I love that for him. And I love that for us because there's a lot of people who are not okay with that. But it was also for my kids. I still have 3 Kings in our family and Jeremy's kids. And so it was kind of a way to hold space for both. And we've not looked back from that. So
I love that.
I love that too.
I remember, I think maybe that is what made people send you some weird messages or post some weird things that then ultimately Steve wrote some really beautiful thoughts in kind of like defense of your whole thing. But I just remember being so shocked at people's reaction to you finding love again, deciding to go the whole 2-name route. Yeah, people.
How could anyone have pushback for that? That's such a beautiful symbol. That's like so honoring equally of what's real.
Yeah.
People. Yeah. People are great. They're just fun. They give you
internet.
The internet.
Their opinion. My husband often says that unsolicited advice is really just criticism in disguise. So it's I got a lot of unsolicited advice. And another thing that I think grief has done for me is it kind of has unwillingly stripped away the people pleaser in me. Cause I really am a born people pleaser, 100%. What people thought of me mattered a whole lot. And even when Steve and I got married, you know, hindsight, we could have eloped and it would have been fine. I already had a wedding, a beautiful wedding, but I felt so tied to wanting to make sure everybody felt like they were participating in my story that I couldn't not do that. And I've grown a lot from that. And from the lovely people on the internet who are always so helpful in giving their opinions on how to do things. And so ironically, that also happened on my honeymoon. There was somebody who just, I don't even remember. Of course, it was anonymous, but it was at the time a blog comment that was very lengthy and very hurtful. And, you know, it was one of those things where I was like, they don't know. They haven't been through this. Like, who are they to tell me what I'm doing and what I'm not doing? But Steve really took that hard. And so actually for a while, he had a blog as well called Love in the Aftermath. And we kind of had this person who was like, I'm not taking advice from people who just got married. You guys literally have no idea what you're doing. Like, wait 10 years and then maybe I'll see if this is legitimate. So every once in a while, you know, I kind of look that person up and be like, surprise. Do
you want to hear from
how's
us
it going? Am I valid enough for you now?
That's right. Right.
Yikes.
Can you take my advice yet? So it's just,
that's amazing.
you know, it is what it is. But yes, he has always been a very strong fighter and for me and for our family. And so I'm very thankful for that.
How beautiful.
So then how did this sixth child come into the world? I mean, not how, we're really clear on the how, but you know,
it
more
came
generally.
about very much the same way that Carter came about. I was like, I'm done. This is way too many kids. And then you add on to the fact that I had a kid by myself and I didn't ever want to do that again. I was terrified of going through that experience again.
Yes.
And so, we are both like 5. That's a lot. Who needs more than 5 kids? But we went to a Super Bowl party at a friend's house who had a 3-week-old baby. And my husband, who loves football, wanted to hold that baby the whole night. He has always just loved babies. But I remember actually being at Rochester Church, which Jessica's familiar with. And every Sunday I would take the kids to class and I would come back and he was holding somebody's kid. I'm like, how do you find these kids? Where are they coming from? I was like, I just love holding babies. So we always said he has a cuddly touch, you know, he always put babies to sleep and that's just kind of how he is. So he's a big teddy bear. So we went to this party, he held this baby and the whole way home, he was like, you know, wouldn't it be great? I was like, are you serious? And he was like, I just think it would be so great if we could just, you and I do this, you know, we haven't gotten to do this together. And
good pitch.
I know. How old were you at that point?
That's a good question.
Roughly.
I was probably 29, 30.
Okay.
Yeah. Hold on. I got to think back. Yeah.
Wait, so this is pretty soon. This is pretty soon into your guys'
pretty
marriage.
fresh after being married.
I think so. Carter and Bear are like 3 years apart.
Okay.
So yeah, not too far apart. So yeah, it was another one of those things where the stars aligned and here we are. And you know, the story that gets written is always not what you think it will be. And if somebody showed me this version of the story 15 years ago, I would have ran screaming in the other direction. But I love my story. I'm thankful for my story. And I don't know what I would do without that little guy. You know, he really is the glue that holds our family together. And walking through that experience with Steve was something, you know, that you can't duplicate and you can't force, you can't make up. Like, it was a beautiful thing. Of course, I had a lot of anxiety going through that, especially around the 6-month mark. And, you know, at the time, so when I had that blog, you know, I told you it blew up and there were people from all over the world that were reaching out to me and just this beautiful thing happened and this community was created. But then I also was, hired on to be an author for a blog called Widow's Voice. And so I was actually still an author through that even through the beginning of my new marriage, through my pregnancy with Bear. And so I got to do a lot of that out loud as well. And so that has always been a really interesting thing to go back and read every once in a while and remember just how all of those puzzle pieces came together in a really unique way.
How amazing. You've lived so many things. Because to think like having your kids with Jeremy, then Steve's got his girls and the dynamic pre-you, and then having you come in as mom and having to, I'm sure, figure out like how do you parent all of these kids who you love so much, but they came to you differently. And then, have Carter and then have Bear with Steve. Oh my gosh, you should write a book. You should tell all of these different things and teach the things you've learned.
Yeah, it is all sort of chapters, isn't it? Like each of the things that you just described is like, and there's this chapter and this chapter. And where did you moved to be with him, or did you guys move to a new place?
No, I told him on one of the first phone calls I had, like, if you're into me, you got to come here. I'm not going anywhere.
I love that.
Yeah. And he was fine with that. And what's ironic is we didn't stay there long because, we got back into ministry. We moved to West Virginia. Then we moved back to Michigan for 7 years. And now we're here in Tennessee. And so God has taken us everywhere. That's just our story. There's so many interwoven pieces that just don't make sense until you know all of them. And they all overlap. And there's so many wild pieces and chapters to it that it's cool. I've not always been cool with it, but it's really neat to look back and say, all right, there's some really neat things to share. And I've always, from day one, speaking is not my gift, but it's always been something where I've like, okay, if I have a story to share that's going to help somebody, I'm trying to be willing to do that. And so I've been shown time and time again that I do have a story to share. And I'm always so thrilled when there's even the remote possibility that someone can glean something from that, because really that's what we're all here for, right? Is to help each other and lift each other up, because how do we get through that without it?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe to wrap us up, do you have like a couple of things that if someone is listening who's a little bit more toward the beginning of an experience like that would just be like some little morsels to help nourish them?
Yes. So for me, and again, grief is very selfish. It's also very personal. So there's no one right way to do that. And I've walked through grief many times since then for lots of different things. And so I know that there is not a cure-all. There's not a formula to walk through it. I would say number one, even if it's not in a public setting, write, journal, get it down, have a safe place to just spew your guts and eventually come back to it. It doesn't have to be clean or pretty or make sense. It just has to be real and raw. And it's just a way to let it go. That for me was very healing. Number two, I would say, don't let other people tell you how to grieve. And I did that so many times as a people pleaser, as someone who wanted everyone to like the way I grieved and wanted to like me while I grieved. I did a lot of damage at the beginning, and I had to learn a lot of mistakes through that. And so, hindsight, I've learned some of those tools, and I feel like I've done that a lot better as I've grown in wisdom. And, I would say when I first was in my grief process, I had a really hard time accepting, help, accepting resources. I didn't want to admit that anybody knew what I was feeling or understood what I was going through. In fact, it kind of made me mad. if I'm being honest, I remember people sending me scriptures after I grieved, and I was like, I don't want this. This is trash. This doesn't help me at all. Like, I'm just really mad. And, so this isn't always the cure all, but there is a post on my blog that says like, oh, I should have looked it up before we talked today, but it is, how to help when someone's in grief or what to do when someone's grieving. And it's just like practical things, like being willing to talk about that person in and of itself. Like we tiptoe around that, and that's not helpful for anybody. Just little things that can help you get through that. And then as I've walked through that and learned the lessons from making a lot of mistakes, I will say having a community of people who is just willing to absorb that and take the rawness of that and take the realness of you without telling you how to grieve, those people are pretty special and worth hanging on to. So.
Beautiful.
Amazing.
Actually, you helped me. I was at a wedding 2 weeks ago where your brothers were, and a family I encountered, they had lost their son had passed away in a few weeks prior, an adult son in his late 20s, early 30s, and nobody was talking about it. And I was with this family like over and over several days in a row. And everyone knew that this had happened, but nobody was bringing it up. And I thought of that. I think it was from your list or something. And so I went to the parents and was like, I'm a mom. And if my child had passed away recently, I would just want someone to acknowledge that they should have been here. Like it was a wedding, you know? And then it was really beautiful because then it turned into good conversation and more people walked over and were like, yeah, exactly. We've all been thinking this, but nobody knew like when to bring it up. So I just appreciate that kind of insight is like, don't pretend it didn't happen or don't pretend they don't exist or something. It's really important.
Yeah. And I have encountered a few people who aren't necessarily comfortable with that, but overall that has been my experience is that people want to remember. I want, if nobody remembers anything about me, I'm okay with that, but I want Jeremy to be remembered and I want his kids to know him and know who he was and just what an incredible guy he was. And, every year, I still get opinions about it every year about sharing my story, even though I've been married for 12 years. People are uncomfortable with that, but I'm like, you know what? It's not just my story to tell. It's someone else's, and it's someone else's dad and son and brother, friend. And, he mattered. And so he didn't stop mattering because he was, he's not here anymore. So that's right. That is, I'm glad you did that. That's really good. I'm glad that was a good experience.
Yeah, it was awkward, to be honest. It was awkward. It was awkward, but it wasn't like emotional. It was just like nobody was crying. It was just nobody knew how to tread on this topic that was so vulnerable, and everyone knew we were all feeling the same thing about it. So,
sometimes it's just as simple as sharing a funny story. Like, I want to remember that Jeremy had a crass sense of humor, and sometimes he said stupid things, or the way he would wrestle with the kids or whatever. I remember thinking, it can be just as simple as like, would your son have loved to be at this wedding? Was he, just little things that doesn't have to be necessarily emotional. But those bits of laughter and sharing common stories, like those go a long way. And there's a resource, actually, that's where I was going with that. When I was not ready to absorb those resources, I approached them on my own. I wanted to do it on my own timeline. And so when I was ready, there's a source called Soaring Spirits. And it's actually the organization that I was hired on to be an author for. We actually traveled for a couple years speaking for something called Camp Widow, which is still in existence today. Yeah. And so their website is wonderful. It's a wonderful resource for anybody who's kind of going through the first stages of grief and loss. And for me, it was like a private way to read through other people's experiences without having to engage one-on-one with someone when I wasn't ready. And that kind of opened me up to say like, oh yeah, there are other people going through this. Oh yeah, there's a community here. Oh yeah, I can be mad. I can be mad at God. I can be mad at what's going on in my life. I can wrestle through these things. And so that would be one resource that I definitely feel like would be useful to anybody in that journey.
Okay. Amazing. Awesome.
Great. Well, we'll link that when this episode comes out. We'll link that in the description, and we'll also link your blog if anybody wants to just jump in more and get to know that story and take in from it.
It's old. I haven't posted anything since I think 2015 when something in my journey also happened that was incredible. I read it this week and I was like, whoa, I forgot, just amazing. So I haven't been on there since then, but I'm glad that it can still be a useful resource for people who are kind of walking through that. So yeah, please share and always reach out to me. I mean, you can get a hold of me even through my business on Instagram. I'm there as the letter V, and I'm happy to be able to be a resource. You say it's awkward, and you would think that because I've been through a process like that, it would not be as awkward. And it is still awkward every time. Yeah. I still feel at a loss for what to say and what to do and how to help. So I go back to that resource often.
Okay. Amazing. Thank you so much for being here with us and for sharing
Thank you for
all
having
of this.
me.
It's great to see you.
It was such a pleasure. I know.
Yeah, thank you.
I do want you to know that the fanhood goes both ways, because I've watched your family grow from when it was just you and Sean. I mean, honestly, it's just been such a sweet, sweet thing to watch y'all. And you are just spreading so much light in the world, and it makes my heart happy to watch.
The thing of life that I'm learning, and I know you'll agree because we talk, is like it's possible to look back on things and find beautiful silver lining, like really amazing things. And yet we still don't need to conclude that everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
And that was the way it needed to unfold.
Yeah.
Tragedy for me, like I don't get that.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
I agree.
I love her ability to point out the beauty in the midst of all of these things that were really awful and painful. Yeah. And I also love that it doesn't just mean like, and so when hard things happen, you just fall backwards into a pillow and know that this is the plan.
Yeah. She's really specific about like when things are helpful and when things are not helpful, right? In the moments of the tragedy, knowing that there's going to be beauty in the story is nothing. That's nothing. And that's not for this time. And she talks about how like some of those messages were like so enraging to her in the moments before they were for her. They just weren't for her then.
Yeah.
But we can know that if you're in it, they will be someday.
Yes.
And if you've had it, already. It could be now.
Yeah.
And we can know that the future things that we feel so terrified about. I mean, I remember when we recorded this episode, we got off the phone with her and both of us were just like so full of so many things. And one of the things was like, God damn it. When you love something, it can go.
Yeah.
And it was a powerful and good and moving kind of, it was the kind of scary that made me like hold my person and like have him because he is here.
Yeah.
And
Brene Brown talks about that thing of like, well, you guys know when you put your baby down and they're sleeping and they're so sweet and beautiful, how you immediately have these like really terrifying thoughts of like something bad is
that something dread. It's some kind of dread,
like impending doom.
Impending doom.
I think. It? Yeah. Basically, she connects that to the vulnerability of love. Like to love someone so deeply is to expose and risk yourself to the pain that would come.
Yeah.
And basically, so she's normalizing it. So we're normal. And then her kind of way that I interpreted was like, when you start to feel those feelings, you can combat them by just like being thankful for this moment. Like, oh, thank you for this sweet baby that I love so much that it scares me.
Currently here.
Yeah. And I love you so much that it's a risk. And that's the way I want to live anyway.
Yeah.
I want to love so deeply that it would hurt if I wasn't.
Yeah.
And
we get to see in Vee's story, like to me, pairing that story with this feeling of like, oh my God, I'm just this little person. I'm totally vulnerable to lose me or them or but like having a story like that to come alongside and be like, maybe, right? Part of the scary thing is like, yeah, maybe, but there's more. It's long and it's textured and there's after even when the worst thing happens, there's still after. I think it's a powerful treatment.
Absolutely.
For that burbling anxiety.
That's right. And for those of us who are walking through real grief right now. So I know some of you who are listening, I know that you've lost loved ones recently or you've lost loved ones years before, but around this time or the holidays are triggering this sense of like, they're not here and memories would be. And we just want to encourage you to let the feelings be what they need to feel. You don't have to find the beauty all the time, but also when you do, feel free to talk about it and welcome those who love you into that. But if sometimes you just need to feel the sadness or feel the fear and communicate that to the people with you, you don't have to accommodate everybody else in your process of grief. If anything, you can invite them into whatever it is that you're doing. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Don't feel like you need to be alone in it, even though there is something that is pretty alone. I think Vee even talks about that. Like there is something that this is your loss and nobody can really understand it the way you can because you're the only one in this particular relationship with the one who is no longer here.
Yeah.
But the sense of loss is one that we all understand to some degree, like it's unthinkable, and we don't want you to feel that by yourself. So seek out community, friendship, love. Like what you have here in Very Good Mothers Club is a bunch of people who relate and want to be in relationship with others. And so if you're looking for a community, we happen to have an amazing one and would love for you to be a part of it. But yeah, you're just doing so good. And I hope that you have a magical holiday time. And I hope that your life is like rich and beautiful and vibrant, and that you're able to now hear this story and kind of find your own sweet miracles and mercies, like all throughout the things you're going through.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Okay. Love you guys. See you next week.